We looked last week into some of the treasures that we can find in God's Word, some things that are concealed in the Hebrew language, and we'll show some other things also in a while. And I promised last week to continue with the story of David and Goliath and look at all the symbology that is in there to make us aware of how rich God's Word is, and also to recognize these attributes in other verses that you will read. Whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, it doesn't make any difference actually, because these numbers, these metaphors, these typologies, they are consistent throughout all the Bible, which is a miracle in itself if you think of the fact that it's been written over a time span of several thousands of years by about 40 different authors in different languages. It's really a miracle that it is so consistent. When we are at the battlefield where we have the Philistines and the Israelites, the Philistines led or fronted by Goliath, and on the other side there is the Israelites led by King Saul, basically being sore afraid, as we read last week, because of this giant. This is a picture of a future war, of a war that we usually refer to as the War of Armageddon, or the Battle of Armageddon, that we find in Revelation 19. In that, David is a type of the Messiah, of Jesus. And Goliath is a type of the beast, or sometimes called the Antichrist. And it's really stunning if you look into these scriptures how many parallels there are. So I want to look at a couple of these things, but first I want to go to Revelation 13, which is sits there in the middle of the book of Revelation, and it's actually, in a sense, the most it's also literary, the central chapter in the book of Revelation, because it is there where the first and the second beast are being revealed, and the power, and we read, of course, there about the mark of the beast. It is that midpoint in the 7-year tribulation period, and the second half is, of course, the worst, and it begins there. So we will not read the whole chapter. I will first read the first 7 verses, and I will come back to some of these things afterwards when we look at David and Goliath. By the way, the book of Revelation uses many metaphors, many pictures, that if you have no idea about them, it's very enigmatic and you might not understand what it says. But once you know these metaphors, it's actually not so difficult to read. And the metaphors are, almost all of them are explained in Scripture itself. Verse 1 says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And then I skip to verse 18, the last verse here. There it says, Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 603 score and 6, or 666. So this chapter describes the rise of the beast that will rule over all nations. It says all kindreds and all tongues. In other words, all of the world. And he will do so for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. We see in verse 1 that he says, I saw the beast rise up out of the sea. Now, sea is a metaphor for people, for a nation, a multitude of people. So he comes out of the people. He's not a heavenly being or a creature from under the world, as we also can read in the book of Revelation, but he's a man. But he's not an ordinary man, as we can read here. He gets all the authority, power, and his seat, which means the authority to rule the kingship of the dragon. And the dragon is explained in the previous chapter. That's Satan, the serpent. So he gets all the power and authority of Satan. And it says in verse 3, All the world wandered after the beast, and they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. So all the world will worship Satan, the dragon. So there's much more in here. There are numbers with 7 heads and 10 crowns, all these things. We will not go into too many things, maybe some other time. But this is the beast, and he will be used by Satan to lead the world, to destruction actually, but in the end to make war with Jesus as he returns. That is what Satan wants. He wants to defeat Jesus and exalt himself above the throne of God. So with this in the back of our head, we go to the story of David and Goliath, which is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. And as I said, Goliath is a picture, a type of the beast. Often he's called the Antichrist, but the correct way to address him would actually be the beast. That is how the Bible calls him, the beast. So we can find attributes in Goliath that we can also find in what we just read about the beast. This man of perdition, as Paul calls him. So 1 Samuel 17 verse 4, it says, And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So some modern translations have changed this 6 cubits into some metric value, or so many feet and inches, but this is what it says, 6 cubits. So maybe it's good to write down a few things. I have, by the way, still what we gathered last week, and I will leave that partially. So we see his length is 6. In verse 7, a bit down, we read, And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. 600 shekels is not by chance, you understand. That's another 6, or 600 if you will. You know, every time in Scripture when you read a number, it's there for a reason. And it's that specific number for a reason. And of course we already saw last week what 6 means. It's the number of man and it's the number of sin. And we just read in Revelation 13 verse 18 that the number of the beast is a number of man, 666. So we continue now, we go to 2 Samuel, chapter 21, verse 20. We just read Goliath was from Gath, that's the city he was from. We read last week that Joshua had slain all these Anakims, all these giants, except in Gaza, in Gath. And so that's where Goliath was from. And there was yet a battle in Gath, and there was a man of great stature, meaning a giant, that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number. And he also was born to the giant. So here we see 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. We read the same in 1 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 5 and 6. And there was war again with the Philistines. And Elhanan, the son of Jair, slew Lahmi, the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, whose staff was like a weaver's beam. And yet again there was a war at Gath, where was a man of great stature, whose fingers and toes were 24, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot, and he also was the son of the giant. So, 6 fingers, 6 toes. So we see the number 6 is all over this Goliath. And it's a clear reference to the beast that we find in Revelation 13. And I think I mentioned also last week, this number 666 is much more to it. Of course, it's the letter Vav in Hebrew, the number 6. And a Vav is a nail. And 3 times a Vav, 3 nails were used to crucify Jesus. So this is all connected. Sometimes, I also mentioned this last week, there is this coincidental link to numbers of chapters and verses, but we find this in Revelation 13, the number of rebellion, in verse 18, and 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6. It's very easy actually to remember this. We go back to 1 Samuel 17 to find another parallel between Goliath and the beast mentioned in Revelation. 1 Samuel 17 verse 34. It is now David who has appeared there, and he says, "Why are you not doing anything against this giant? I will take care of him." And of course they laugh at him because he's just a boy, just a teenager. And then David speaks to Saul, to the king. And David said unto Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he had defied the armies of the living God. David said moreover, The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee." This shows, by the way, what a shepherd is. We talked about it, of course, a while ago at Psalm 23, that a shepherd really fights with his life to defend his sheep. And you see one lamb taken by a lion. The shepherd goes after the lion to kill the lion. He doesn't say, well, okay, too bad for the lamb, I have many other sheep. But the point here, several times David says, a lion and a bear came and I slew them. And in Revelation 13 we just read in verse 2, his feet were as the feet of a bear and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And that is exactly what David is saying. He says, this uncircumcised Philistine, he is like this lion and this bear. And this is what Revelation 13 says. The beast is like a lion and a bear. So we see there another parallel. Indeed, 1 Samuel 17, verse 16. It says there, and the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. For 40 days this Goliath was coming forth and shouting to these Israelites, challenging them. We saw last week that 40 is the number of testing. So this was a test for the Israelites, and apparently they failed the test because they just let it happen and they didn't do anything. What was this Goliath doing? He was blaspheming God. Okay, I don't know so quick what it is, but anyway, he was blaspheming God. He was challenging the Israelites. And what does the beast do in Revelation? He's doing the same in chapter 13, Revelation 13, verse 5. Was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. So he was also, or he will also be speaking blaspheme language. In verse 6, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. So also Goliath, he was making fun and cursing the Israelites, and what can you do? Where is your God? There is one difference though. Goliath did so for 40 days, and the beast will do so, in verse 5, chapter 13 of Revelation, for 42 months. So we find a different number here, 42 instead of 40. And there's a purpose, obviously. 40 is testing. That was what was happening there with Goliath and David, was a lesson to learn. To learn to trust God. And 42, that is during the Great Tribulation, the second half of the tribulation period, when God's wrath is poured out. The time of testing is over when that happens. And now it's the time of judgment, actually. And 42 is... it's like the ultimate form of rebellion. I have said 13 is rebellion. So is 42. Why is that? 42, actually all the numbers, they have double meanings. They have a good meaning and they have a bad meaning. 6 is the number of men, which is good, which is also the number of sin, which is bad. So we find the same with 13, for example. Jesus and his disciples were 13. That was good. But it's also rebellion. We saw last week in Genesis 14, verse 4, we find this connection between 13 and rebellion. But there is also a connection in the number 6 and 7. 13 is 6 plus 7. And so, if man exalts himself above God, that's rebellion. That is what rebellion is. It's always against God. So man exalts himself over God. That is rebellion. And that we find back in 13, which is 6 plus 7. But also in 42, which is 6 times 7. It's the same thing. It's man exalting himself over God. And that is what Goliath was doing. He was shouting to the Israelites that he was greater than them and their God. And that's the same that the beast will do. He will actually step into the temple to literally exalt himself above God. In everything that belongs to Satan, you will find this rebellion, because this is Satan's whole drive, to exalt himself above God. This is his rebellion, and he drags anyone who he can with him in that rebellion. That's why we find the number 13 in all kinds of occult societies and in symbolism, as well as the number 42. One example, if I have it, I'm not sure. Yes, is the famous dollar bill, which is full of occult symbolism. But we're not talking about the pyramid now, but if you see this group of stars here above the eagle, you will find that there are 13 stars in there. And they are in such a shape that you can draw the Star of David, the hexagram, on top of it, and you will see that inside will be 7 stars, and outside in the 6 points are 6 other stars. So the 6th man is around or above, if you will, God. And that is symbolized here in this little group of stars. There are also 13 feathers and 13 stripes, etc., etc. But you can take a closer look if you want. So this is not by chance. This is all by design. And these are things that we can see how Satan has infiltrated on every level in our world. So although there is a difference between 40 and 42, there is also the similarity that one is the testing and the other is beyond the test. Now it's pure rebellion. And so the war takes place. And the war is not really a war, it's not really a battle, because it's man to man. Although there are 2 armies there gathered in this valley, it's only David and Goliath that fight. And even that is not much of a fight, actually. And we know how it ends. So we know how this war has ended between David and Goliath, and therefore we know also how this future war will end. In 1 Samuel 17, verse 49, we read there, "And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth." And so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. So he never had to touch him in order to kill him. He slung a stone and that was it. We know, of course, what the stone or the rock, Petra, what it symbolizes. It's Jesus. If we see in Revelation how the war ends, that's Revelation chapter 19, and in particular verse 20 and 21. It was so that when Goliath was defeated, the war was settled. That meant that the Israelites had won. And so there was no more fight between the rest of the army. And so we see the same here. And it says, "And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh." So Jesus settles the battle here by throwing the beast into the lake of fire alive. And the rest is slain by the sword, which is the word that proceeds from his mouth. So although Satan will gather all the armies of the world in this final battle, and they will all be there in this valley east of Jerusalem to come against Jesus, there will be actually no real fight, no real battle, other than that Jesus will settle it, just as David settled it with one sling. We just read in 1 Samuel that this little stone hits Goliath in his head. It sinks in his head. And what happens then after that, in verse 50, in 1 Samuel 17, or let's go to verse 51, it says, "Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And the Philistines saw their champion was dead, and they fled." So after he killed him, he cut off his head. in Revelation 13, verse 3, talking about the beast with his 7 heads, it says, "And I saw one of his heads as if it were wounded to death. And this deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." So we see again a deadly head wound. But it seemed healed. He will continue for a time, for a short time. But we see the same, the deadly wound on the head. Yes, in verse 14, Revelation 13, the last part, you see the same, talking about the beast, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. Also the wound by a sword. Just as David gave with his stone the deadly head wound and cut his head off with a sword. So more parallels to these both. Then back to 1 Samuel 17, verse 44. It says there, this is before David kills Goliath, he speaks to him, and you see how confident and full of trust David is. He knows that he has victory because God is with him. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field." And then David says, "Hey, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." And so he is not impressed by these words. But what does Goliath himself say? He speaks about the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field that will eat the flesh. And actually it will be the other way around. And also in Revelation 19 we read this exact same thing in verse 17 and through 19. So just before Jesus throws the beast into, and the second beast into the lake of fire, it says there, "And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, Come down, come and gather yourselves together unto the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of mighty men." By the way, mighty men is not only men with power, but can also be read as giants, which I believe there will be giants present at that moment. "And the flesh of horses and of them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse, and against his army." So we see the same. It is, the flesh is for the fowls of the air. The same picture there. Then we see in 1 Samuel 17, we read it already, that David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone. He did not use the sword to kill Goliath. The stone killed Goliath. And so this is a prophecy that also applies to what Jesus will do in the end times. He will prevail not with earthly weapons, but with his word. And for that we go to Zechariah chapter 9 verse 15. "The Lord of hosts shall defend them, and they shall devour and subdue with sling stones. And they shall drink and make a noise as through wine, and they shall be filled like bowls, and as the corners of the altar." It's with sling stones. Not with a sword. There will be no sword in his hand. And of course in Revelation 19, but we read it already, we also see there is no sword. It's the sword of Jesus' mouth, which is the word, that will kill, but not the weapons of men. The war that we are in actually right now is a spiritual war. And at that very end, in Revelation 19, when Satan sends forth demons to the kings of the world to inspire them to come with their armies to Jerusalem to fight the return of Jesus, that is where we see that the spiritual war and our physical realm, that it comes together. And we see now the end of this physical war of this spiritual war, we see it manifest physically. Although the weapons, or the weapon, I should say, that Jesus uses is spiritual in nature, of course. So there are many parallels between Goliath and the beast in Revelation, and between the way of his defeat and the way we read it in Revelation 19 in particular. And so there are many parallels between David and Jesus. David is called the apple of God's eye. There is so much scripture about David here as a teenager, and even before that, of course, when he gets anointed, when he is just a young boy shepherd for his father. And then we have many stories after that when he is persecuted by Saul, and eventually he becomes king. And of course we have the many psalms that he wrote, so we know lots of details about his life. And afterwards in the New Testament, Jesus is often referred to as coming from the house of David. It's not Jesse or anyone else, it's the house of David. It's there actually where this marker is set, that from there the Messiah would come, from the house of David. And his name is interesting in many ways. And I looked up some things. David obviously is from the tribe of Judah, as Jesus is from the tribe of Judah, or Yehuda in Hebrew. So I did not write the translation because by now we can read Hebrew. What does it say here? Bravo. Yeah. The Yod, this is the He, Yah, the Vav, Yahweh. So, this is the name of God. This says Yah, and then the Vav again, and then the daleth, and the He, Yahuda. This is the tribe of Judah. Yes, and you can see the difference is one letter, and that's the daleth that comes in between. So from Yahweh to the tribe of Judah, Yehuda, is only one letter difference in Hebrew, and the letter is the daleth, and the daleth is in our language the D, or the delta in Greek, the fourth letter of the alphabet, both Hebrew and Greek and Latin, by the way. So it's the number 4. And the name of David begins with the daleth. He will come forth from this tribe. So it's the letter of his name that is a difference actually between the name of God and the tribe from which the Messiah would come. And he would come through David. And so here we have again Judah, Yehuda, the tribe. Here we have the name of David. You can spell it 2 ways. This is Dalet, Vav, Dalet, David, or with the Yod in between. To get from here to here, if you see the He, it's actually a Dalet with a Yod. So many Hebrew letters actually are built from other letters. And the Yod is the smallest component, which actually points to God. It's so tiny, but the power is immense. It's also the fist. So the He is a Dalet and a Yod. So if you remove the Yod, you have the Dalet. And the Vav is the Vav, and this Dalet is that Dalet. So you see actually in the center here, removing the Yod, you have the name David is actually written in the name of the tribe. So it's not only that his letter is added in Yahweh, but actually his whole name is written in the name of the tribe. And if you want to use this removed Yod, you can use this spelling, because that's where it goes. Yes. So basically, from this, you can make this. The yod goes there, and then the rest is already okay. What is left is the yod and the he, which is Yah, which is God. It's the short form of Yahweh. So then you're back. The circle is around again. So it's beautiful how it's perfectly symbolized in the name. God would reveal his Messiah through the tribe of Judah, beginning with the house of David. And there is another interesting thing with the daleth, because the daleth is also a word. As we know, in Hebrew, every letter is a letter, it's a number, and it's a word. So the word daleth it means to draw, to pull in, like you would draw in fish from the sea or something. And because of that, it has also the meaning door. If you have the front door of your house, almost everywhere, it opens inside. It's never so that someone rings at the outside and then you throw the door in their face. You open to welcome them in. So you draw them in as you open the door. You draw them in. That is the idea. So daleth means door. So now you see that the door to salvation comes from Yahweh through the tribe of Judah, through the house of David. And this word here is dat. The daleth and the dat. And this means religion. This means religion. So the Hebrew word for religion is dat. Now what is interesting is what it actually means, because religion is a meaningless word. It means the door to the cross. That is what religion is intended to be, the door to the cross. Unfortunately, it's not what it is in practice, but that's what it's intended to be. And what is the door? The door is the Messiah who comes from the house of David, from the tribe of Judah, the Son of God. So the daleth is really a picture of the door that God opens to give us access to him through his Son, Jesus. So many more things can be said about this letter, and this number, but I think this is enough for now. So David is this picture of the Messiah. They share the same bloodline. Of course, we went through the genealogy and we came to all of that. But let's read from the New Testament, Luke chapter 1, verse 27. And when we went through the genealogy, we saw that he had to be from the house of David to inherit kingship. And at the same time, Joseph, who was, of course, Jesus' father by adoption, could not be his biological father because of a curse on that house. But it says here, to a virgin espoused, to virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. So we see he's from the house of David by inheritance, but not by biology, so by inheritance. And through Mary's line, of course, this curse was circumvented. So there are, of course, many other scriptures that show that we know he's from the house of David. It's as the Jews expect their Messiah to be Yeshua HaMashiach ben David. So Jesus the Messiah, son of David. That is the Messiah that they are waiting for. That we know he already came once. But this Jesus they regard as Yeshua ben Yosef, the son of Joseph, and not Yeshua ben David. He was, both David and Jesus were born in the same city. city of Bethlehem. So, since we are in Luke 2, chapter 2, verse 4 through 6, and we know that Joseph and Mary, they had to go to Bethlehem because of this counting of the citizens, and every man and his family had to return to the house of their ancestors. And so Joseph was from the house of David, and that's why he went to Bethlehem. So Joseph went also up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea. By the way, here you see that it's also Jesus from Nazareth, and it's also Jesus from Galilee. He fulfilled all these prophecies through this. Into Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And that's why Jesus was born there, because of this edict. And in 1 Samuel 17, verse 15, we read, David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem, or Bethlehem. So here we see they lived in Bethlehem. Why did they live in Bethlehem? You have to go back to Ruth. She came with Naomi in Bethlehem, and there she married Boaz, and she was the grandfather of Jesse, David's father, the great-grandmother of David, Ruth. So this whole history is in God's hand. He led all this. So also in verse 58 you can read again, Saul said unto him, so after David had this victory, Saul said unto him, whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Last verse. So clearly he was from Bethlehem. So Jesus and David from the same lineage, from the same city. In 1 Samuel 16, the preceding chapter, verse 1, we read about the prophet Samuel. He is called by the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thy horn with oil and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. So now Saul, who was anointed to be king, he fell out of the grace of God because of his behavior, his heart, and now David is to be anointed. And in verse 13, then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went unto Ramah. So David was anointed to be king. And Jesus, in Luke 1, was also anointed to be king. Jesus is anointed to be king. He was, during his walk on earth, actually never king, except maybe for the one day, Palm Sunday, as we call it. But as we read in Revelation, Revelation 19, when he returns, he has a name, King of Kings. And in Luke 1, verse 33, it says, and he, talking about Jesus, he shall reign over the house of Jacob, which is Israel, forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. So he will be king, he will reign, and his reign will last forever. So that's another similarity between David and Jesus. They are both kings, or anointed to be king. Specifically selected by God. David was selected by God. They were both shepherds. We read several times already that David was herding the sheep. He was still too young to be in the army. 3 of his elder brothers were in the army. and he was herding the sheep, and we know, of course, also from Jesus that he is the good shepherd, as he says himself. Yeah, so they were both shepherds. Then something interesting in John, Gospel of John, chapter 14, where we were a lot last Sunday. John 14, verse 6 and 7. Jesus said unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. If you had known me, you should have known my Father also. And from henceforth you know him, and have seen him. So, what is Jesus saying? If you know me, you know the Father. Why? Because I am from the Father, and I am his son. He doesn't say that here literally, but that's of course what we know. So, he is from the Father, sent by the Father. Therefore, knowing him is knowing the Father. And through him we have access to the Father. If we go back to 1 Samuel, chapter 17, verse 17. So it's where David's brethren are in the army. David is with his father, Jesse, and then Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn and 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. So Jesse, David's father, is sending his son to visit his brethren. And it says run to the camp. He goes actually with a wagon, because he brings a lot of food. This is not a small amount that he brings, also 10 cheeses for the army. So it's a lot of food that he brings there. But anyway, he is sent by the Father. That is the point here. So both Jesus and David are sent by their Father to visit their brethren. Jesus first comes to visit his brethren, the Israelites, the Jews. That was his first audience. What did he come to bring? Let's first stay here. We just read an ephah of parched corn and 10 loaves. Again, there's a number there, 10. I don't know if we wrote it down. No. The number 10 is the law. 10 commandments, easy to remember. So 10 is the number for the law. So 10 loaves he brings. This symbolizes that he is going to bring the law of God to the Israelites. He's going to show them who holds the law. Yep. So if we go to Colossians chapter 2 verse 14. And remember, when David went, it was 40 days, it was a time of testing. It was in the valley of the oak tree we saw last week, which is like the classroom. It was a lesson for the Israelites and, of course, for all of us. Here in Colossians 2 verse 14, it says, talking about Jesus, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances, or the law, that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. So Jesus has blotted out the verdict of the law. The verdict is against us. It's actually the death penalty. He removed it with his sacrifice. So one brings the law, the other delivers from the judgment of the law, or the penalty of the law. Now both began their ministry when they were 30 years old. When this battle took place, David was only 17, but when he became king, he would be 30 years old, with the same age that Jesus had when he began his ministry. So that is another similarity there. Okay, there are more parallels, but I want to speed it up here. And look at some numbers. We already have many numbers, but I want a few more. What I haven't written down here is the number 5. We started with 6, but there is of course also the number 5 here in this story. Goliath had 4 brothers, or others think it's 4 sons. Either way, depends how you interpret these texts, but there were 4 more, so 5 in total. And we see also that David takes 5 stones. He uses only 1, but he takes 5 stones. So it shows that the victory that God has, that he gives us through Jesus, is not only for the enemy that we see, but it's also for the enemy that we are not even aware of, because David did at that moment not know there were 5 or 4 more. So that's a very beautiful picture for us to see, that we can have this victory through him, not only over what threatens us, what we see, what gives us fear, but even this that we cannot see, that we don't even know that it's coming at us. 5, of course, is the number of grace. It points to the 5 wounds that Jesus had on the cross. It's the grace with which he overcame of sin, which is death. So we don't need to read it now, but in 1 Samuel 17, verse 40, you can read that David takes 5 stones. 5 is therefore a good number, but it's also a bad number. Satan, he turns everything always upside down. So in occultism, 5 is actually bad. We know, of course, about the famous pentagram, or Pandalpha, this 5-pointed cross, which is the logo of the Church of Satan. That's also the number 5, but it's very bad, obviously. So we see 5 in many instances. 5, one example that I want to point out is in Joshua, in chapter 10. Joshua 10, verse 22-23. This is where Joshua has defeated 5 kings. He goes in the land, obviously, and after Jericho and the city of Ai, they defeat one after the other tribe. And actually, it's God who goes before them and delivers them to him. 5 kings. So here's the number 5 again. And here we see how it points to something bad. They are locked up in a cave, and there it says, then said Joshua, open the mouth of the cave, and bring out those 5 kings unto me out of the cave. And they did so, and brought forth those 5 kings unto him out of the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Yarmut, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. 5 kings are being taken out of the cave. And in verse 26, afterward Joshua smote them, and slew them, and hanged them on 5 trees. And they were hanging upon the trees until the evening. And it came to pass at the time of the going down of the sun, that Joshua commanded, and they took them down off the trees, and cast them into the cave wherein they had been hid. And he laid great stones in the cave's mouth, which remained until this very day. So we see 5 kings taken out of the cave. They are then killed, hung on trees until sunset, and then they are put back in the cave. Now, what does all this mean? We can actually find this in Revelation 9. This is also a foreshadow, just like the story of Goliath and David in Revelation 9. Revelation is, of course, a book of 7s. It begins with the 7 churches, but later on we have the 7 seal judgments, the 7 trumpet judgments, and then in the second half of the 7 years we have the 7 bowl judgments. And so here, this part is in the first half when the trumpet judgments are being executed, and it says the 5th angel sound. So we are here again 5. This is the 5th trumpet. And I saw a star fall from heaven to the earth. That's, of course, an angel or a demon. It can be both. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. So think of Joshua, the bottomless pit. This is the cave, is a picture of the bottomless pit, the cave that he's going to open. So here we see also an angel getting this key to the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose smoke out of the pit, and as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the reason of smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And it was given to them that they should not kill them, but that they should torment, how long? 5 months. And their torment was a torment of a scorpion, and he striketh a man. And in those days men shall seek death, and they shall not find it. They shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Okay, goes on in verse 10. They had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. Until there. So we see this foreshadow of what Joshua shows. We see it here in Revelation 9, this cave, bottomless pit opening, and what comes out is evil. These kings were evil kings, they were the giants, they were the enemy. And they are slain, and then they are hung on trees. And there you see the link to Jesus. How is evil defeated? By Jesus. By actually his cross. If you read Revelation 12, it says they overcame him, the angels overcame the demons, by the blood of the Lamb, which was shed on the cross. So it's by Jesus' death on the cross, his blood, that evil has been overcome. And that is what also in the story of Joshua we can see. They are hung on trees, just like Jesus was hung on a tree. He was hung on a tree, on a cross, until sunset. Same as we read in Joshua. When the sun set, then they were taken and cast into this cave. Same with Jesus. He died on the cross. His body was taken down before sunset, and he went into Hades, in the kingdom of death. So all of this we see in this history that we find in the Old Testament. 5 is both grace, it's both evil. 8 is also the number of Jesus. And Jesus did not only die, but he also rose from death. When on the first day of the week, or the 8th day of the previous week, on the 17th of the month Nisan, which is the Feast of First Fruits, which is the day on which the ark landed on Mount Ararat with 8 people. 8 is the number of new beginning. And lo and behold, when what we just read, that God speaks to Samuel that Saul can no longer be king, and that Samuel should anoint a new king, David. And Samuel goes to Jesse. Jesse presents all his sons, 7 sons, and the king is not among them. And then Samuel says, do you have another son maybe? And, oh yes, of course, there is also David, but he's just a boy, he's in the fields. Go get him. And he becomes king. He is the 8th son of Jesse. So we see again there 8 as the new beginning. This will be a new kingdom, the beginning of a new kingdom. The 10 we mentioned, the law. 13 we mentioned. 17 is also a number that we find many times in the Bible. 17 is the number of victory. David was 17 years old when he had victory over Goliath. By chance, it's in 1 Samuel 17, this whole story. Or not by chance, but anyway, it's there. So once you know that 17 is the number of victory, you can easily remember that the story of David and Goliath is in 1 Samuel 17. 18, we have mentioned many times this 666 in verse 18 of Revelation 13. In occultism, they often don't use 666 because it's too obvious. They use 18 instead. Or they use 9, because 18 is 1 and 8. If you add it up, 1 plus 8 is 9. So they use the number 9. So there's different ways to present this. We read last week from Luke 13 verse 16 that Jesus frees this woman from her bondage. And then the Pharisees, they rebuke actually the people for coming to Jesus on a Sunday, on a Sabbath, I should say. And then he says, this daughter of Abraham was in bondage for 18 years. So there is of course a link to 666, but there is also, he says, it's a daughter of Abraham. Now, daughter is a woman, and a woman always is either a church or a nation. In this case, it's a daughter of Abraham. God made a covenant with Abraham to bring from him a nation. So the daughter of Abraham is actually the nation Israel. The nation of Israel is in bondage and will be freed by Jesus. This is, of course, Revelation 12, where this is played out. So there is, in this one sentence there, in Luke, is a lot of meaning. And once you know the symbols, you begin to recognize these things. You know the number 18, you know a daughter or a woman must be a nation or a church. You can easily find this meaning. It shows again how rich God's word is, how many layers we can find if we really take the time to study and allow, of course, the Spirit to also reveal these things to us. It's really, you're always amazed again and again and left in awe. Last thing I want to mention is about the names that we already mentioned. Of course, David as how it symbolizes in Hebrew, but his name also has a meaning. Often names have multiple meanings also, but most used meaning for this word is the beloved one. The beloved one, the treasure, the beloved one of God. And Goliath also has many names. Usually we think Goliath means giant. It doesn't mean this is the modern meaning that it has God, because he was a giant, but his name means to reveal, to actually reveal something that is not good. And he was, through his actions, while for 40 days testing the Israelites, he was revealing the unbelief and the fear of the Israelites. So that was what his purpose, if you will. Always try, this at least what I try to do, and try to share, find these meanings of names, of numbers, not of course forgetting what it plainly says, because there's also just what we read, but there is so much more to it that we can learn. And also shows that how we interpret Revelation, that it matches what we read in 1 Samuel, for example, or in Joshua, or in other scriptures. So we can test also that we have it the right way. Sometimes you get explanations, read things on the internet or see things, how people explain certain Bible verses, but then it does not match with all the other pictures, and so you know already this is not correct, apart from the fact that the Spirit easily gives you this discernment, but it really deepens our knowledge, our wisdom, and it makes us in that grow closer to God. So here, amen.